There once was a boy who never truly felt like he belonged. He was mistreated and lived in a cupboard under the stairs, until one day, a large stranger told him he was a wizard, and he explained the lightning-shaped scar he got as a baby after narrowly avoiding death.
And as you can see, I am not dead, T'Challa shouted as he approached his estranged cousin, ready to reclaim the throne. Although his adversary would not yield, those loyal to him fought back valiantly, inspired by
1.21 gigawatts of electricity racing through the flux capacitor, giving the DeLorean enough power to make it back to 1985. Marty smiled. He was headed home after what could only be described as...
After what could only be described as some sort of dream, she finally realized she could find everything her heart desired in her own backyard. She clicked her heels together 3 times and said,
"If you build it, they will come, Ray. The one constant through all the years has been baseball. This field, this game, it's part of our past. It reminds us of all that was once good and it could be again." And then Ray looked up and saw the young baseball player waiting on the field was actually his father.
It was actually his father, the villain who had taken his hand with a lightsaber and then tried to woo him with promises of shared dominion over the galaxy, stood before him and revealed his true identity. He stood there stunned as the music swelled to close out the shocking, powerful scene.
We kicked off a new series last week called The Power of a Made-Up Story. What's interesting is that most of the stories that we read or we perhaps watch are made-up stories that aren't even true at all, but they have this kind of underlying truth behind them. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks. Jesus talked a lot, and he talked a lot through stories we call parables. Last week, Chris taught us a new word. It's actually a really ancient, old word, but new to us, and that's called Haggadah. If that word brings up images of ice cream, you can say thanks. You'll be dealing with that for the next hour and make a trip to the store afterwards. So this idea of Haggadah is this. It's storytelling with a point. It's storytelling with a point. So this ancient kind of Jewish rabbinical tradition was to tell stories to make a point, but these stories that they would tell would often lead us to a place where we would have to make a decision. The stories would be challenging, sometimes they would be disturbing, sometimes they would make us feel a little uncomfortable, but the entire point of it was to tell a story that wasn't true but had some underlying truth behind it to lead us to a place where we were forced to make a decision. Last week, Chris talked about 3 stories that Jesus told, these kind of mini stories, these parables about lost things, lost sheep, coins, the lost son. And the point of the story was to celebrate that when lost things become found things, it matters to God and it matters to us. It's actually the heartbeat of Ridge, the heartbeat of the church, and you were invited to kind of step into that to help find lost things, to join the search party. Today, we're taking a second step. There's something else that when it comes to this idea of Haggadah that we want to introduce, and it's the idea of characterization. Characterization is bringing these important figures, important characters into a story. It's what makes a story important because we can connect with what's actually happening, these kind of important, pronounced characters. And as Jesus taught all throughout his stories, he would often include characters that the audience could connect to. Sometimes we read it and we don't connect to it all the time, but Jesus would mention characters and bring characters into his story that the audience could connect with. Things like farmers and kings and fathers and sons and priests and Levites and masters and servants. And they were all understood in this culture because it was very commonplace for them. But another thing that was common in Jesus' story is that in almost every one of his parables, there are 2 characters that are often mentioned. Now, there's always these kind of side characters, these extras in the story, if you will. But there's always 2 characters that have a place in Jesus' story. One character always represents God, because that's the point of the parable. Jesus is telling us the story so that we would understand our Father and understand our relationship to him. And the next is a character that always represents man or woman or you and me. There's a character that represents us. There's another character that takes a place in a lot of Jesus' stories, and It's a king. And anytime Jesus refers to a king in any of his stories, it actually represents God. It doesn't represent you as much as you want to think that you're the king in the story. It's not. It's actually God. But here's the deal. As we dive into this story, which involves a king, there's kind of something I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we're walking through this. Which character are you? Where do you show up in the midst of this parable that we're going to look at and dive into? That's your work as we get started. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 18. Jesus tells us a story about a king and two servants. And as most of his stories kind of begin, he jumps into this story based off a question. The parable's preceded by some question that's asked, and then Jesus jumps into it. Well, it's no different in this story at all. Jesus tells us a story about a king and two servants, and it's preceded by Peter, this kind of outspoken disciple. Maybe he spoke for the group, or he just liked to speak, because some people like to do that. But Peter speaks up and asks Jesus a question, and then Jesus jumps into the story. Here's the question that Peter asks. Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times?" Which feels perhaps a little bit like a random number to us. Like, why would he choose 7? Maybe because in that culture, 7 represents like completion or perfection. We're not really sure. We'll talk a little about that idea later on. But we know that Peter starts off with this question, "Lord, how often do I need to forgive someone? 7 times? Jesus immediately replies back, No, Peter. Not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Any of you good at math in here? Can you help me out with that? About 490? Okay, we're going to get some 4th graders next door. Last week we baptized a bunch of elementary kids, and they all said, I think every one of them said their favorite subject was math. One kid said, "I actually excel highly at math." So we'll just pull him in. He'll help us through our talk today. We're actually going to do some math, not just there, but a little throughout the message. But Jesus is saying 70 times 7, and we can relate that number to 490 because that's what he means. But he's not actually trying to have Peter do some math and work out some multiplication. What he's actually doing is referring back to Genesis. The first idea of this 70 times 7 pops up in Genesis chapter 4 in the story of Cain and Abel. And the idea that's given here when they reference this idea is it's like this immeasurable amount. It's an innumerable amount. It's, Peter, you're worried about 7. No, it's not 7. I want you to forgive like an innumerable amount of times. And Peter understands this. And before Peter can say anything, Peter jumps right into a story. Peter asks a question. "Jesus, how much should I forgive? 7? No, not 7. 70 times 7. Therefore, Peter," jumps right in. "Therefore, Peter, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king, which we already established is not us. It can be compared to a king who decides to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him." There's this king, and he's given a lot of his wealth out. He's kind of given loans out, and he wants to call the accounts due. He wants to amass his fortune once again. Which brings him to a servant. In the process, one of his debtors, one of his servants, was brought in who owed him, and that's a word that I'm not sure any of you can actually pronounce. I actually struggle, and I have the translation here. It's miron talandan. Yeah, good luck saying that. Miron talandan. This is the New Living Translation. Your translation may say something different. It might say something like 10,000 bags of gold, but what this literal translation actually means is 10,000 talents. Now, we don't really understand what a talent is, so we're going to look at that in a little bit when we do our math. But Jesus is basically saying this servant owes the king an incredible amount of money, 10,000 talents, but he couldn't pay. He couldn't pay it. So the master ordered that he be sold, ordered that he would be sold along with his wife, his children, everything he owned to pay the debt. And even if everything he owned and his wife and his kids and himself were sold, it wouldn't even begin to pay back just a portion of the debt. The master, the king, is demanding that his entire life be liquidated to pay back what he owes. But the servant falls down before the master, falls at his feet before his master and begs him, pleads with him, "Please, please, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all. Just give me a little more time. I'm not asking you to take the debt away. I'm not asking you to reduce the debt by a percentage. Just give me a little more time, and I will pay it back." And then his master And I love how Jesus says this. This word compassion. It's the same idea we got last week when we talked about the father with the prodigal son as he sat out on the front of the house waiting for his son to return, and he sees him and his heart is filled with compassion. It's the same word. It's the same idea. The master looks at his servant and is filled with compassion for him. So he released him and forgave the entire debt. Just wiped it away. Just forgave everything that the servant owed the master. You came, and because of the posture you took, because you fell before me and you begged, I'm going to wipe it all away. I release you of what you owe me. But then this servant leaves the master. And when the servant leaves the king, he goes and finds another servant. This isn't like a servant who works for him. This is like a peer. It's like another servant of the king. It's just a guy, perhaps a friend, who owes him some money. He finds a servant who owed him, again, another word that you're not going to be able to pronounce. This is hekaton denari. And the reason I went back to these words is because our Bible sometimes translates it so that we understand it, but I want to take it back to what its real meaning was so we can kind of branch out from there and get a real understanding of what Jesus is talking about. This basically means 100 denarii. I'm not sure what 100 denarii is. Your text might say 100 silver coins. The literal translation is 100 denarii. Jesus says he walks out of being forgiven this great debt to the king, and he runs into a friend, to somebody who owes him some money, 100 denarii, which is still something significant. And what does he do? He demands the debt be paid. He grabs him by the throat, Jesus tells us, and he demands for instant payment. He just walked out of that room. Demands instant payment. His fellow servant, this is going to sound very familiar. This is like Act 1, Scene 1. Servant 1 walks into the king demands payment, he falls down and begs. Act 1, Scene 2, the fellow servant falls down before him, begs, just a little more time. Be patient with me, and I will pay it, he pleaded. But the creditor, servant number 1, he wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested, put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. What's interesting to me is that he's thrown in prison where he can't work to pay the debt back. He had him thrown into prison. Wouldn't pay off his debt after what he'd just been forgiven. So here's where math comes into this. So for all of you who proved earlier you're really astute at math, we're going to help you through this. Here's what we know. Servant number 1 owes 10,000 talents to the king. Servant number 2 owes 100 denarii to servant number 1. We're not really sure what those actually mean, but let's break it down further. A talent, we know this, a talent is equal to 6,000 denarii. And 1 denarii is 1 day's wage. Start beginning to feel the gap in what's owed, beginning to feel the weight of the difference of each. So if we break that out further, that means servant number 1 owes the king 60 million days' wages. And servant number 2 owes servant number 1 100 days' wages. Now, perhaps we still don't understand the gravity of what's being owed here. So let's make it, let's take it a little further. Servant number 1, let's take it like in today's understanding, right? In North Carolina, the federal minimum wage, the state minimum wage is $7.25. So you get $7.25 an hour to work. That's your minimum pay. If you work 8 hours, which is considered a full day, 1 day's wage, at $7.25 an hour, you get $58. That means that if you work for minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, at $58 a day, servant number 1 owes the king $3.48 billion. And servant number 2, I mean, it's still somewhat of a significant amount. That's like $5,800. That's like 6 kids going to student camp. It feels like 3 kids. It's expensive these days. I mean, there's a vast difference in what's being owed here. And Jesus, I think, is trying to prove this point. Like there's a difference. There's a magnitude of difference between what servant number 1 owed and what servant number 2 owed. Like, how in the world did they get in this position? As a matter of fact, I find myself asking this question about servant number 1. Maybe it's a question I'll ask Jesus someday. Like, how did servant number 1 get in that much debt? That will be the first question. The second question, who keeps lending to this guy? Like, how is that a good idea? And every time I'll figure it out, I'll pay you back. Like, who keeps lending to him? This is the position we find ourselves in. And if you look at that amount and you think, that's not much, I could pay that off, I want to introduce you to our forefund, where we would love for you to help us give money away to some incredible people who need it. If that's not a big amount. It's a huge amount. And Jesus is painting this picture so that we get the idea of the vastness of the difference of what's being owed between these two servants. $3.48 billion. It feels unimaginable. I mean, for some of us, it might even feel mind-bending, but what's even more mind-bending, what's even more mind-blowing than that, is the king's response to the servant. You remember the servant comes into him, $3.48 billion in debt, and what does the servant ask? Please be patient with me, and I will pay it back. To which I'm sure the king looked at him and said, no, you won't. Like, there's no way you can pay that kind of money back. There's not enough time for you to pay that kind of money back. There's no way for you to pay it back. But notice what the king says. He doesn't say that. And he doesn't say, okay, well, let's figure it out. I'll be a little patient with you, and we'll figure out like your income and what you owe for debt, and we'll get a little spreadsheet worked up so that you can get on a payment plan. This will age me, but you remember the bank books you were given when you used to buy a car? It's not like he came to the king and said, hey, here's your bank book, and it's like a mile-high bank book of like payments that's due. Like, that's not what the king does. Because the king knows that there's no way for him to pay it back. As a matter of fact, if the servant tried to pay it back and worked 8 hours a day at minimum wage, he would have to work 164,383 and a half years every day, and all of that money would go to the king. There is just not enough time. There is no way. Be patient with me, the servant asks, and the king actually denies the extension. No, I'm not going to be patient with you because there is no way for you to do this. But what I will do is cancel the debt entirely. $384 billion. Gone. You're forgiven. I no longer hold that against you. You don't owe me anything. To which we think that doesn't make any sense. Like, who could do that? Only the king. Only the king was in a position where he could forgive that. I mean, if somebody owed me $3.84 billion, like, that's world changing. I won't give you an extension. I won't be patient because you can't pay it back. But I will forgive you. Because the king understood this guy's only hope. This guy's family, his wife, his kids, their only hope wasn't patience. It was mercy. It was grace. It was forgiveness for the debt that he amassed. The king is being merciful. That's exactly what servant number one gets. And he walks away free. You remember Jesus said, this is what the kingdom of heaven is like. And it's unimaginable to us. It's unimaginable to us that somebody could owe that kind of money and walk into the room to the person he owes it to and then walk out completely free. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what happens. And servant number one walks out of the room with the king. And then it's like this complete shift happens, this paradigm shift. The tables are immediately turned. The roles are reversed. He bumps into the servant that owes him some money. And it's somewhat of a significant amount, but it's nothing compared to what he owed. And he chose not to forgive. And the servant did exactly what he did. Just give me a little more time, and I can pay it back. And the truth is, he probably could pay it back. But he denies. No extension. Throw it in prison until you can pay the debt off. And this is incredibly important. What servant number one owed was not insignificant. What servant one owed is irreconcilable. There's no way for us to process that. There's no way to put even a number on that. Like, we tried, but it's like no one has seen that kind of wealth before. All of that feels irreconcilable. But let's go back to Peter's original question. Oftentimes we read through these parables and we forget kind of where it started. Jesus started this story about the king and the two servants and all this stuff based upon Peter's original question. Do you remember the question Peter asked? Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? Again, 7 feels random. Maybe it's that number of completion. But there's another possibility in this, is that in this ancient religious tradition, the rabbis would teach that you only had to forgive somebody 3 times for the same offense. that if somebody were to sin against you the same way 3 times is all you had to offer in forgiveness, and after that, you could hold over the debt you owed. You could demand they pay. You could put them in prison. You could do whatever you had to. You just had to offer forgiveness 3 times. And it wasn't kind of some random thing they came up with. They got this from the book of Amos, which is an Old Testament book. In chapter 1, the people of Israel sin against God the same way 3 times, and then God punishes them. So they took that, well, this must be what God is like. So if this is what God is like, this is all you have to do. Just forgive somebody 3 times and you can move on. What's interesting is Peter knows that. And Peter says, Jesus, you're not going to be satisfied with that answer. I know you. I know how you operate. You're going to go above that. So I'm going to shoot for where I think you're going to go. 7 times? Is that the most I have to forgive? What's really interesting about Peter's question, though, is I think what Peter is really asking is a different question behind this. And I think it's a question that most of us find ourselves asking when we feel like we're indebted to. And that's really this. Jesus, when can I be unforgiving? When is enough enough? When is it too much? When is it too far? Like surely, Jesus, it's not 3 times like the rabbis. You never agree with the rabbis and the religious teachers. You're going to go a little further, like maybe 7. Like at some point, I want to fulfill my religious duties, Jesus. I want to be like a good Christian, a good follower of Jesus. I know I have to forgive, but where's the line? Mark the line for me so I can get right up to it, and that's as far as I'll go. Jesus, when can I not forgive? When can I say enough is enough? And if we really look at this question, I think there's something happening underneath the scenes with Peter that may be happening or happened to a lot of us. And that's this. I think Peter's been hurt. I think Peter's been wronged. I think somebody owes him a great debt. I'm not sure where along the way. We don't know what happened, but this sounds like somebody who's been hurt, who's been wronged, who's holding on to some things, and they want to know how far do I have to go? Show me the line and let me get there. And then after that, I want to be able to hold it over. I want to be able to demand that it's paid back. And what Jesus does through this story is he begins to show Peter what Peter's been offended with, but how much Peter's actually offended. The debt that's owed, the debt that's owed Peter, and the debt that Peter's actually being forgiven of. And Jesus is saying it's this immeasurable amount, Peter. It's an irreconcilable debt. Here's Jesus' point. Peter, if you don't understand this, if you don't understand this thing about forgiveness, it's this. Our capacity to forgive flows from what we've been forgiven. The reservoir that we have to draw from to forgive. It's like there's only so much within us, and the more we're forgiven, the more we're able to forgive. Peter, there's a connection between the two, and you spend all your time focused on what you're owed. But the question for me and for you is, how do we view our debt? How do we view what we've being forgiven? Jesus tells this story, and he's using some hyperbole because he wants Peter to get this great understanding of what's being owed him and what he owes. It's like this jar. This little bead in here is one of those beads they make bracelets with. You may not know what this is, but if you're a girl dad, you definitely know what this is. I've got a bunch of these bracelets, friendship bracelets. They get a new one almost every week, hang up in my truck. It's like God saying, Peter, like this is your life, and this little bead that's shaking around here, this is what's owed you. And this is an illustration, please. I'm not saying what's owed you in any way is insignificant. And Jesus isn't saying that either. He's saying actually what owed you is significant. And it's real, and it hurt, and it is owed you. But what he's trying to tell Peter is in comparison to this, we can spend so much of our time when we're hurt. When we feel like somebody wronged us, when we feel like somebody's indebted, just focusing on what's owed us that we forget what we owed. So much time focusing on what needs to be forgiven and forgetting what's already been forgiven for us. And Jesus tells this story, which is a little hyperbole, but to paint the picture of what's been actually owed. So I'm going to ask my friend Seco to come up. He's going to help me with an illustration. I was corrected a little bit ago. All of these beads you're going to see here He's making a lot of friendship bracelets. Thank you, guys. This is a lot. My daughters, Sophia and my youngest, Juliana, helped me pack these, and I was instructed I had to give credit because I did nothing. They did it all. So thank you, girls, for helping me there. I'm sure that'll pay me back with some friendship bracelets later on. Here we go. There's a lot. It's a lot of bracelets. It's a lot of beads. Feels like a lot, right? There's one, and this is about 50,000 beads. And someone asked me in our run through this morning, like, did you count all those? I said, no, I'm not that dumb. I bought them. maybe that makes me dumber, but you get the idea. Like, it's still significant, and we're still owed, and it still hurts, and it still matters. Jesus said, but what you've been forgiven. And here's the thing, I filled this table. This is 1 in 50,000, but when we go back to those numbers of 3.48 billion and 5,800, the ratio is actually 1 in 600,000. So I need about 12 of these tables filling the stage so that we would get a better understanding of what Jesus actually means. Peter, you're owed, and you've been wronged, and you've been hurt. But don't lose sight of what you've done and what you've been forgiven and what was required of me to offer that to you. Because that lands heavy. And again, Jesus isn't making sight of what's been done to Peter or what's been done to you or to me. It's significant. And maybe your jar doesn't look like this. Maybe your jar looks more like this. Maybe it's been a lot. And it's not like one person. Maybe it's just a bunch of somebodies over the course of your lifetime who've wronged you and hurt you. And they're filling your jar. And there's a debt that needs to be paid. Jesus said, yeah, but even if you fill this jar, and I won't take the time to fill the whole thing, but you can imagine, even if we fill this jar, in comparison to 12 of these tables of what Jesus offered us, the forgiveness and the grace and the mercy, it's still, the ratios just don't work out. Jesus did all of this to remind Peter and to remind us of what we've been forgiven, because so often when we've been wronged and when we've been hurt, we spend all our time looking at our jar of what's being owed us, of our jar of debt, of what people owe us. And we forget what it looks like in contrast of what we've been forgiven and what's been paid for us. And it doesn't take away from the significance of it. It doesn't take away from what's actually been done. But the truth is still there. And the question we're left with is this: will you forgive just as you've been forgiven? For some of you, it's real. I heard from some of you after first service. It's still real. You're walking through it. It's not something that happened in your past. You're walking through it right now. Or maybe it did happen in your past, and when we touch on it in environments like this, it comes back up and it makes us feel really uncomfortable and angry and hurt all over again, because what's been done to you is real and it hurts. Somebody or a group of somebodies, they offended you in an incredibly significant way. Maybe it was abandonment, betrayal, infidelity, abuse, or neglect. Maybe it wasn't even you. Maybe it was something that happened to your kids. And when something happens to your kids, it feels unforgivable, doesn't it? A few weeks ago, one of my daughters, who was a victim of bullying, in a video of the experience, made it to a group chat online. My wife saw it, and she asked me if I wanted to see it. And I said, no, please don't show me that video. She said, why? And I said, because I will hate them. And I don't want to hate them. But I know that there's something in me when you hurt my kids. It's offensive to me, and it feels unforgivable, and it's a weight. And for some of you, you've walked through that and you live that, and in no way is Jesus saying the things that have been done to you are insignificant compared That's not what he's saying at all. He's saying they are significant, and it is owed you, and it hurts, and it's insurmountable. But the question still remains to you, the same question that remained with Peter. Will you forgive as you've been forgiven? And that question for some of you, it feels impossible. Just the question feels offensive. Some of you say, Jim, it's just not that easy. And I would say, you're right, kind of. It's not easy and it's not simple. And that's the harsh truth about forgiveness. The reason forgiveness is so hard is because to forgive somebody else, you have to absorb the cost. Just like the king was willing to absorb the $3.48 billion, like you got to know the cost. And you have to be willing to absorb it. And for some of us, that's the hard part. I don't know what the cost is. I don't even want to quantify the cost because every time I think about it, it hurts. And I cry and I get emotional and I get angry. And man, if somebody hurt you in an insignificant way, or a significant way rather, isn't it true that there will never be enough they can do? There's never enough they can pay back. There's never enough they can do. There's never enough they can do to ever restore the relationship because what's lost is lost. So the only way forward for you or for the relationship is canceling the debt. And we can't do that without considering the cost. And guys, that's the hard part. And when I say to consider the cost, it doesn't mean we sit and we look at each one of these beads and we kind of go back over the story and fill us with anger. I mean, count the cost, like what does that do to you emotionally? What does that do to you physically? What did it do to you spiritually? Like, you need to count the cost. You need to understand the debt that's been owed you. You need to quantify the debt that's been owed you. So that in an effort to know, here's what happened to me, and I need to find a way through this. I need to find a way to forgive this. I need to find a way to absorb this. For many of us, we'll begin to look at this and realize, I can't absorb that. And I think that's the point of the story. She's saying you can't on your own, which is why you need to remember what I was willing to do, what I did for you. But for so many of us, that's not how we look at forgiveness, is it? We don't want to count the cost. It hurts too much. It's like when our kids get into a fight and you find out one of them was wronged, and as good parents, we got to teach, you got to ask for forgiveness, you got to offer the forgiveness. I'm sorry. Oh, it's okay. It's not okay. We don't just move past it that fast because what was done was wrong, and it's real, and it matters, and it's significant, and it created a debt between the two of you. We don't just move by it, but isn't this what we tend to do when we're wronged? It's okay. I'll be okay. It's okay. No, it's not. Some of us need to count the cost. We need to know what they actually did and how it affected us. Some of you who've wronged people, you need to know the cost of what you've done, and you need to ask for forgiveness. And that's hard for us. It's hard to know that we were the one who hurt people, and it's hard to be on the other side and count the cost of the hurt. But it's not okay in an effort to get by it quick, in an effort to avoid some awkwardness or confrontation. It's not okay for us just to say, it's okay, it didn't matter. It mattered, and it hurt. And it created a gap and a debt in your relationship that needs to be absorbed. And if you do that, you might find yourself getting to the place where you say, but I can't do it on my own. I'm incapable of absorbing. I'm incapable of canceling the debt. And that's why we have Jesus. For some of you, you may hear this and you might say, Jim, I'm just not ready. That's okay. It's okay to not be ready, but it's not okay to be stalled there. For some of you, the progress for you just looks like just beginning to understand what was owed. Just beginning to quantify the wrong that's been done against you, to count the cost before you can forgive. Some of you may just need to begin to offer forgiveness in layers. I don't know that I can forgive the whole thing, but I can begin to forgive this. I can begin to forgive this. But as you quantify the debt, you might find yourself asking, God, what do I do with all this? And maybe the question we need to ask is, God, will you help me? Will you give me the capacity to absorb the cost? Because that's what this story is all about. But we get stalled here. We get stalled looking at our glass and what's been hurting us. And we forget to look at the glass in the jars of our Savior and what it cost him. And the reason for all of this is Jesus understood this, that if we can't move past this and we can't find a way to empty our jar and we can't find a way to absorb the cost, that there is a cost to us when we don't offer forgiveness. And we know what that cost is, don't we? When we withhold forgiveness, it leads to bitterness. Bitterness is this ugly root that begins, it like plants deep inside us. And but the interesting thing that I find about bitterness, I felt that this way this week as I was working through this. For a good period of time, it's like it's not even there. And then something happens. Then there's a trigger. Then there's a story. Then I run into the person. Then I see something pop up on my social. And this little thing that started off as a little root of bitterness, it feels like it's just consumed me. He said, this is what happens. If you can't get to the place where you can count the cost and you can absorb the cost, which I know feels impossible humanly speaking, but with me, we can do it because I absorbed all of your cost. We can do it together. When we don't do that, bitterness takes root. And bitterness consumes. And it enslaves. And it imprisons not the people who offended us, but it consumes us. And it imprisons us. And hear me say this because I care about you and I care about your relationship that might be fractured or the person on the other side. But we don't do this for the offender's sake. I had someone tell me this morning. Like, I was always taught forgiveness is more about us than it is about anyone else. And I thought, there you go. You've preached my whole message. It would have been a whole lot faster. I could have got you guys out of here. It's not for the offender's sake. It's not for the person who betrayed you. The Apostle Paul says this, it is for freedom that Christ set us free. That's what our King did. When he sent his son to a cross to pay for you and for me, it was for freedom's sake. It was for our freedom's sake that you would receive grace and mercy. But it would cost our King everything. It is for freedom that Christ set us free. So stand firm and don't let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery, by a yoke of prison, by a yoke of bitterness. I've set you free from it. Don't run back to it. But this is what we tend to do when we keep our focus on our jar and what's owed us. I mean, think about the guy who's about to be in prison for owing $3.48 billion, and the master sets him free. Like, you're free from all of this. I've forgiven you. Clean slate. Go live your life. And what does he do? He runs out and immediately throws himself back into a different kind of prison. He doesn't forgive. He gets bitter and he demands what's being owed. I mean, that would make us mad if one of our kids did that. Like, I just let you out. Why are you back in prison? Why are you back locked in there again? That's why the New Testament teaches us this. Make allowance for each other's faults. You're like, Jim, that's not a fault. Like, you don't know what they did to me. You don't know what they did to my kids. You don't know how it changed my life, how it affected my childhood. It was mean. It was wrong. It was spiteful. It was awful. It was a fault. And some faults are way greater than others, but it's still a fault. Just like you have faults and just like I have faults. Make allowance for each other's faults. And forgive anyone. Not just those who are easy to forgive, not just those we want to forgive. Forgive anyone who wrongs you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive. And based on this story, Jesus is saying, the Lord forgave your irreconcilable, immeasurable, innumerable debt. Shouldn't you forgive those who've created a debt against you? See, Jesus cares about you, and he cares about your heart, and he cares about your freedom. And your emotional, spiritual, physical health is connected to that. And it hinges on forgiveness, on our ability to embrace forgiveness and to extend it. Embracing forgiveness sets us free. Extending forgiveness keeps us free. One person describes not extending forgiveness, or in other words, they describe being bitter and holding on to bitterness as drinking poison, hoping the other person dies. That's what it's like to withhold forgiveness. And bitterness takes root in us. But it's not hurting the person who hurt us at all. It's only hurting us. It's enslaving us. It's changing how we live and how we operate. It affects our relationships. It affects our moods. It affects how we connect to our Heavenly Father. So don't let bitterness take root. You see, Jesus understood this. He would say bitterness and gratitude, they can't coexist together. You can't be bitter and grateful. So let go of the bitterness. The point is not whether or not the person who owes you repays you. The point of the story is you were set free. So set someone else free. And if it feels impossible, I think Jesus would look at you and say, it is. Humanly speaking. But with me, all things are possible. Your forgiveness cost the king's son his life. It's what he did to set you free. He willingly, joyfully walked to the cross so that he could extend you grace and mercy and forgiveness. Is it possible that we're holding back forgiveness because we've lost sight of how much we've been forgiven? God wants you to be free. He doesn't want you bound up in a prison of bitterness. But without the grace of Jesus, without this sort of reservoir or well of forgiveness that's been extended to us, we are unable to move forward to forgive others. Some of those things that need to be forgiven can only be done through the well of forgiveness that Jesus has extended to us. If you've read along or you had your Bible, you know that's not the end of the story, though, is it? We kind of ended about 3/4 of the way through the parable. And I don't like to skip, so we're going to go back and we're going to read through it. But I want to forewarn you. We said at the beginning that these stories often demanded a decision from us. And sometimes they could be disturbing and they could make us a little bit uncomfortable. Well, this story is no different. It's actually a great example of how Jesus used these parables, not just to make a point, but to demand a decision. And he ends the parable with kind of this mic drop moment that we're going to read in a minute. We jump back to the story. When some of the other servants saw this, when they saw what servant 1 did to servant 2, that whole ordeal, they were very upset, as they should be. And they went to the king and they told him everything that had happened. And then the king called in the man who had been forgiven, servant number 1, and said, "You evil servant, I forgave you a tremendous debt." I mean, we couldn't even it was innumerable. I forgave you a tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. You begged for mercy. I was moved with compassion for you. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. And the mic drop moment, Jesus concludes with this. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. We didn't even have the time to unpack that. So I'm going to leave that with you. Just like Jesus, we'll kind of walk off and leave that. We're going to leave you. You've got to wrestle with that. And let me be honest, if that's disturbing, if that's unsettling, if that makes you uncomfortable, it should. I think that was the point. But you've got to wrestle this thing to the ground. Here's one thing I'll say about it, and I'll close with this. If there's one thing that's evident in this whole story, but in this last line, it's this. It's that God cares about you and your heart. And he wants you to be free, so much so that he sent his own son to pay the debt that you couldn't pay. And forgiveness is the key. but bitterness is the prison. Will you forgive? Let me pray for you. Father in heaven, Lord, I'm going to thank you for this text, but God, if I'm honest, reading through it, it's hard. And the weight that's put on us, God, it feels so demanding, and in moments, God, just impossible. But if I'm honest, Lord, I think that's the reason you want us to know that we can't do this without you. So for those of us who hear this and we wrestle through, because we've counted the cost and the jar is full and it's a heavy cost. God, would you meet them in this moment? Would you begin to increase their capacity so that they can forgive? God, point their eyes back to what you did for us, to what Jesus paid on our behalf, and expand their capacity so that they can absorb this and move through it, so that they could experience the freedom on the other side. God, for those of us who realize in these moments that perhaps I'm the one who's created that debt, I filled somebody's jar, would you give us the courage, God, to go back and to seek forgiveness, to count the cost of what we've done. And God, for those of us who hear this and it just feels, I don't even know what to do with this. It's heavy and I just don't think I can do it. God, right now, would you begin to give strength? Would you begin to show the way? Would you begin to give wisdom to know what to do with what we've read? And the courage to begin to make progress in that direction. For everyone, Lord, my hope, and I believe your hope, God, is that we would experience the freedom that your Son provided. And that we would begin to experience it by offering forgiveness, by understanding our great need for forgiveness and offering it as well. I pray that in your Son, our Savior's name. Amen. Amen. Guys, it's a hard one and it's a heavy one. And it'll weigh on you. But I want to encourage you with this. Many of you have the day off tomorrow. Take a moment and begin to think, where does this show up in my life? What's in my jar? What am I holding on to? What haven't I taken the time to quantify? And ask God to meet you there and to increase your capacity for forgiveness. Freedom is on the other side of that for you. Guys, thank you for being here this Memorial Day weekend. Before you head out, just a few quick things. We have summer sessions coming up. It's a great time to get plugged in, join a group, young adults, women. There's a group called Alpha that I'm really excited about. I really think if you have the time, you should make that happen and join us for Alpha. Also, big stuff's happening in a few weeks. Next week, parents, we have a mandatory meeting. I was thinking about this after the first service, that $3.84 billion, that's what it feels like it costs for us to get to big stuff. So anything you could do to offer a scholarship to those, we've talked to many of you who've already done that. Thank you so much for playing a part in somebody's ability to experience a life-changing event. That means the world to us, and it means the world to them. It's a life-changing experience. Thank you so much for being here, for being a part of it. I love you. Have a great week.